Hello, I think I'm live. Shalom, if I am. This should be. Why am I not yet seeing myself? Oh, there we are. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this live stream. What do I want to play while we're waiting? I don't know. I'll wait for people to join.
Great, if you got that far, you can't be doing that with the toolkit of exile. But now the people in power are saying, all right, so we got here, so we're definitely going to cut the funds and make sure all the fund goes to these massive groups of Haredi Jews that don't serve in the army and don't have secular studies and are a huge drain on the society, but we're just going to fund them. And then you have a secular being like, well, what do you mean? And it's called like, yeah, it's a political game. And they're very proud about saying, we have rabbis that tell us what to vote, and then we do that. And you guys can do that too, but you guys seem to bicker all the time. We have God telling us to do that. We're going to utilize the system the best we can. So last government fell because it's crazy to think about, though, because there is a religious member of Knesset that says, well, 1 second, you're going to change the status quo and bring in wheat, bread products into the hospital on Passover? No way. Shut this government down. You're like, shut the government down means like hospital, schools, everything. And like, nope, this is what it means. And then you have religious rabbis that are like MKs were voted by are playing the political game, and at the same time going to rabbis and ask their permissions. And like, yeah, it's nice that the prime minister said that, but you know, he's just a man. And like, God is very present in these conversations. Now, in the army, sorry, please.
Oh, what's that, Scott? So, yeah. This is, I think, where, again, as I said earlier, Israel's sort of this little microcosm, and it's convenient because, okay, it's not Christianity, it's Israel. And there's been this long history. Yosef will say something right after I get off.
As you would occur. The Judaism, basically, what it's been doing the past 150 years or so is essentially been trying to play catch up with the Western Christian world in many ways, because they had hundreds of years through the Renaissance and the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and the Peace of Westphalia, and the emergence of the nation state, and then the Enlightenment, and into the revolutions of the 19th century, etc., and then 20th century.
Hey, Father Eric.
Howdy. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy almost New Year.
Happy almost New Year to you, too. I'm glad Unitarians still celebrate Christmas.
Yeah, actually, there's a debate about that in the Facebook group. It's funny. The pro-Christmas camp won a poll like 85-15, though, on the should Christians celebrate Christmas
Okay.
thing.
Okay. Yeah,
it's funny. The Pilgrims, like the Puritans who came over to the U.S., weren't pro-Christmas. I think they celebrated Easter, but I think nothing else, because they were
anti-popery. You could say
anti-popery. Yeah, anti-popery, and Christmas was popery. But I think that the charismatic power of Christmas won out in America in the long run.
Yeah.
Candlemas. Well, it has the word mass in it. If we had just said Christ birth or something instead of Christ mass, maybe it could have gotten the pass by the Puritans.
What does mass even mean? It just means sending. Right? Ite missa est. Go, you are sent out.
It's the word. It's from the words at the end saying,
yeah.
It's from the benediction, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Where's the link? How do we get Paul in here?
Yeah. Oh, I got it. Don't worry.
You got it. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Boom. It's literally just the bar on top. But now we have to look out for trolls.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have the powers to fence the trolls.
Yeah. This thing, I think, is a magnet for them, though.
Fair enough. Hey, Paul.
Oh, you guys are just so tempting.
Yeah. Well, I know your afternoons are right after your lunch hour, I think, is like the best time to grab you. So I was like, how do I get Paul on here? I'm going to do 3 p.m. Central.
Well, actually, I need to write my sermon. I'm talking to Vervaeke tomorrow about the first episode of After Socrates.
Was that a public or a private talk?
Well, it will be public after we record it.
Okay.
But I got to write my sermon, and I spent all morning just doing sort of financial reimbursement reports.
Fun.
Father Eric, do you have to do things like that? Should I if I became Catholic, could I avoid all the administrative work I hate?
No.
Oh shucks! Oh,
we actually have more of it probably.
I guess I'll stay Christian.
But I'm currently assistant, so I don't have to worry about those things yet.
I hate to tell you, but in the secular world, there are even more of them. So just count yourself lucky.
No, I think that's true. I've pared it down to very, very little, but even the little I have to do, I just hate. So it gives me a chance to listen to videos.
Yeah.
Well, a very interesting thing what you had to say about the Mass. I saw that you, Sam, you looked at a little bit of my Chezi conversation, which is still, I'm going through, and actually I was just listening to that 5-hour live stream he was doing with the rabbi, his rabbi friend, and then the little piece that I took out from my video today. So I don't know. Those things are just sort of reverberating in my ear as I'm working through the Reformed guys and their Winsome Wars.
I had been listening to your talk today kind of throughout my work day. Normally your 2-hour video will take me, from breaks and stops and restarts and, all those sorts of things. That's about the perfect amount of listening for a work day for me. And maybe I'll get distracted by, a critical drinker video or something like that. But that guy at the Negative World conference, I don't know. It was just bringing up the question in my mind. I think this will be relevant for you and Vervaeke and Cooper. Is what are your thoughts on like negative versus positive anthropology, and how do you balance that? Because I think that one of the things that seemed most poignant to Vervaeke in his criticisms of Luther and his responses to Jordan Cooper on that topic were this sort of how negatively / positively to view the current human condition. And in that video, that was that Negative World guy, the bald, restless, and reformed guy, he was, coming across pretty standard, YRR Calvinist negative anthropology. And so that was a question that I had for you. How do you think about that when you especially approaching this Vervaeke Cooper conversation?
Well, the Vervaeke Cooper conversation is going to be interesting because I think you laid it out well in that one Just Chatting, that there are areas of, let's say, propositional correctness that John Vervaeke will probably have to be corrected on. And that's just true of all of us. None of us can know everything well enough to get everything right. And so I regularly have Yosef and Jacob and Father Eric and all people are always correcting me, and you, Sam, on propositional stuff. So there'll be some of that. They're much bigger questions though, in terms of the historical question of, was Luther an example of these massive changes that are flowing through our culture? Or to what degree is Luther an instigator and therefore can be held responsible? And to what degree are some of these negative things that Vervaeke is pointing to isolatable to, like Protestantism? Because of course they get into Trent as well. And I mean, we're all flowing in this river together, and there's a lot of stuff going down this river. And part of what I'm struggling with in terms of the Negative World and this Winsome conversation is doing mass evaluation it's just always fraught and never accurate. And you have the same issue when it comes to, theological anthropology for human beings. How do you can certainly look at our fallenness and somehow, let's say our rebellion and our limitation, because those are two aspects of our condition on the negative side. We are severely limited and we are rebellious. And those have different valences. But, so Neil Plantinga would always talk about us as being fallen royalty, where he tries to, because if you're overly negative, your evaluation is off, and to me, it's part of this reality about evaluation where it's always way too pervasive and way too deep to adequately address in our models, especially in like captured sentences. So, and that's why we're always talking, because we're always sort of, how fallen are we? Yeah, Romans 3. But we're fallen royalty, and we're image bearers. And it just, the more I listen to stuff and the more I work through stuff, it just makes it all increasingly difficult and gives me a sense of frustration with our language tools, which sort of throws me into the pragmatist in terms of what we do is so vitally important. Yeah. So I don't know. I think, my expectations for that first talk with Jordan Cooper and John Vervaeke are pretty low. A conversation like that won't get too far beyond, okay, can we trust each other? I mean, this is really, that's where it goes. And we'll have a few points of light, and they'll
although Cooper and Peugeot had a good conversation.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't necessarily have to be the case.
Right. And Cooper and I had a good conversation. And so I'm optimistic that Cooper and John will have a good conversation. But, I just watched the first episode of After Socrates. As with some of the stuff at Thunder Bay, some people are going to get triggered. There's no question about that.
What are some of the trigger bombs lurking in the first episode of After Socrates?
Nothing.
Give us the spoilers, Paul. Give us the spoilers.
Nothing new. In fact, so one of the keys for John's new project is the attempt to integrate, let's say, inside perspective with external evaluation. And this is a key point with John, with his, the other 3 Ps, that to what degree, let's say, for example, to what degree can I fairly critique Roman Catholicism or biblical Unitarianism without being on the inside? I mean, that's a huge point that all of us have to face. Yet I will, in all likelihood, much to the chagrin of Hank Cruz, never become Roman Catholic. And I think it's even a further stretch that I'm going to become a biblical Unitarian. And then you have the question.
You could always be a closet biblical Unitarian. Lots of Calvinists have done it.
Some people accuse me of being a closet Orthodox or Roman Catholic.
Well, it's much harder to be a closet Catholic and keep, preaching at a Protestant church. You see, for biblical Unitarianism, you can keep that below the surface way easier.
How much do we really talk about the Trinity anyway?
Exactly. Just like if you just talk about God and his son Jesus, no one's going to get mad at you.
I actually do that all the time.
So do I. Jesus, Son of God. There it is.
Right. You see, it doesn't. There's no problem if you don't make it one.
But John's whole project is, of course, in some ways to invite people into a relationship with Socrates, and there's a degree of parallelism, and I don't think I'm being unfair, and I'll talk about this with John, where in some ways this is not parallel, because there are many Christians who are disciples of Socrates. I mean, you read what someone like Peter Kraft has to say about Socrates in his books. Peter Kraft has a huge view of Socrates. But there'll be others who see that as, to what degree is this in competition with someone, advocating people become disciples of Jesus Christ? And John addresses this directly and says, this isn't a zero-sum game between the two. And I think he's right. But again, that's
an interesting question, is, what's the difference between following Jesus and following Socrates? Right. Is Socrates sitting at the right hand of the Father making intercession for us?
Right.
He's in limbo.
Is Socrates a principality?
Right.
And has he been exalted above every principality? or
Right.
is he a
What
dead
about the
man?
pre-existent Socrates? You know,
Well, Socrates was all about pre-existence of souls. So
that's right.
So he
The
thought he
hypostasis of
pre-existed.
Socrates.
But is Socrates a dead skeleton in a grave somewhere in Greece for the last 2,500 years, or whatever? Am I got my dates slightly
Or is he
wrong?
present both in heaven and on earth at the same time?
And where's the body of Socrates? Can I, join the body of Socrates? And what
No,
does
so-
that mean? Yeah.
So again, and none of this is new in terms of if you've been following John's project. It's just with this series, John, the clarity is much more there. And now, in a sense, with these videos, you not only have sort of abstract talk about Socrates, but you have an invitation into a practice. And so that, that now suddenly people are going to say, and again, his practice, if you look at the guided meditation that he did at Thunder Bay, it's essentially the same that he has in the first video with that guided meditation, all the same points. And so, yeah. And that gets into the, where the title finally ended up with the video that I released today was, okay, what's the relationship between natural law and Jesus? Because in my comment section, I've got a lot of natural law fans, and a lot of people got excited about, okay, so good, natural law. And this is a long parallel to the Jewish conversation, and okay, well, how far can that get? Obviously in a Christian frame, we are connecting with, I call it, Creation 1.0, where Jesus is the author of Creation 1.0. And then in his resurrection, he's the inauguration of what I often call Creation 2.0. What's the relationship between those two? And okay, so now, one of the videos that I wanted to bring in is a really nice video that Nate posted on Twitter of a Jungian Roman Catholic monk who kind of walks through Jung and Catholicism and Christianity and draws lines on Jungian interpretation of the Bible. It's a fascinating video, but he basically gets into the fact that Jung only gets you so far. Socrates, I think Christians would say, I think Christians should study Socrates. There's so much Platonism in established Christian teaching.
And in Socrates' own life, there is a voluntary death at the hand of the crowd, right?
That's right.
In Socrates' life, which is very Christ-like.
Right. So there's stuff here. We're not going to have less to talk about after Socrates, I'll tell you that.
Well, that's good. So we've got Exodus, brewing up some stuff to talk about, and Socrates brewing up some stuff. So we've got the mountain in Athens and the mountain in the desert giving us food for thought.
Yeah. So these are all why should I reiterate what's going on in my head when I gave you 4 hours this week of mental meanderings, myopic mental meanderings, as Vendant calls them.
I'm not sure myopic is the right word.
No,
I think that's the exact opposite. There's too much. There's too much. You're trying to
all
the plates.
Too far-sighted, not enough nearsighted.
Yeah. So that's and Chezi has just been, when I listen to Chezi thinking out loud in terms of, I look at these guys, the Doug Wilson, now we've got Battleground Washington, these Pacific Northwest peeps who are reformed, and they feel marginalized ever since Massachusetts joined the Union, or maybe since the Puritanism just isn't what it used to be. And when I hear Chezi and Joseph talking about, the Jews have inherited the kingdom, they're the superpower of the Middle East. The religious factions are in charge of the Knesset. This should be, who needs the Messiah when you've got the Knesset?
Well, and that is, it's an interesting thing because, before I met Jacob, I didn't know that most, Hasidic and hardcore Orthodox Jews were anti-Zionist.
I know.
In my dispensationalist background, of course every Jew is pro-Zionist, right? Duh. but really once I understood what Jacob's point was, is that they don't think that the current state of Israel has, like, as Tom Holland would say, the sacral nature that the real messianic Israel is supposed to have. And then that's starting to get blurry now that there's more and more participation in secular modern Israel from the very non-secular Orthodox and Hasidic Jewish communities, who are drastically out reproducing the secular Jewish communities in Israel.
Yeah. And we're having this conversation on whose channel? You know?
Yeah, it's true.
But
don't pump up his ego too much.
So, but no, you're right. And so, to me, this gets into, you know, my long debate with Jacob about the more I get into this, the more I read the Gospels and say, what's fundamentally happening with Jesus is he is redefining what Messiah means. That's integral to this. Now, this then gets us into this weird space. Aaron Wren had a video that I haven't fully listened to where he quite recently, where he basically says, why is it that the Catholics are sort of kicking Protestantism ass right now in America in terms of elite positions in the government? I mean, look at all the Catholic...
I have a theory, but I'll let Father Eric handle that one first.
Well, and I think some of it has to
You're
do
on
with
mute, Father Eric.
I think some of it has to do with the fact that Catholics and Orthodox have a tradition basically of state power, of dreaded theocracy.
And also, they've been living in the negative world of being a Catholic in a Protestant-dominated culture.
Yeah.
So it's been a negative Catholic world long before it's been a negative Protestant world. So they're perhaps more prepared.
Yeah, and the Klan hated blacks, Jews, and Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, part of the critical history of
did the Puritans in Massachusetts not like those Irish people coming over? Let me tell you. Right. I mean, but there was a reason for that the Americans felt that their experiment was fragile and that this new world, you know, secular Protestant constitutional democracy was always fragile, especially early on, from basically a reconquest from the old world's way of doing things.
Yeah.
Right. And that those Catholics coming over from Ireland or Germany or Italy or wherever were a beachhead for their counter-revolution, I guess you could say.
That's right.
And that, you know, for a long time, America was in a huge minority in terms of the way its government operated and functioned. And it was not unimaginable to imagine a reconquista of the northern part of the New World. And
America are the original anti-monarchists.
Yes. Yes.
Meanwhile, all of the immigrants who show up are tripping over themselves to make sure that everybody knows that they're just good Americans.
Right.
That's right.
Right?
I mean, all the way up to the 1960 election. I mean, everything that JFK had to do to say, yeah, the Pope won't really be in charge. That's not that long ago.
Look at the history of Europe. How many times did the Pope actually tell a Catholic monarch what to do?
Well, he not without trying, whether it succeeded or not.
I don't know. When I watch Vikings, King Alfred really seems to admire the Pope. I think that he would have listened to what the Pope was telling him to do.
Yeah, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So,
yeah.
So it's, to me, this is just such an interesting conversation when, at least in my little Reformed, even the Christian Reformed Church, you know, in my little Reformed corner of American politics, you know, it's like, okay, you guys want to go back to so, you know, they're complaining about the gays and the trans, but it's like, didn't you get that win on abortion? And, you know, it's like, yeah, we're not going to pay attention to our win. So we can keep complaining about the losses and we can keep pumping in these, you know, these alarmist things to get our people all excited.
We only won in Mississippi and Alabama and a few other places like that, Paul. Didn't count that much.
And North Dakota.
And North Dakota. Yeah.
So I don't know. That's what's going through my head. But it's let me just say, I'm just deeply appreciative of all of you in this little corner of the internet, because I mean, I mean, 10 years ago, I would have had all these thoughts by myself.
And they wouldn't have been quite as good of thoughts, if we're honest, either.
No, they would not have been.
Mm-hmm. And you might have wondered if you were half crazy.
Well, I still have that thought.
Maybe this corner hasn't helped that. But it is interesting how the American system has then, really basically because of World War II, projected itself enormously, and that the old world didn't reconquer North America or the New World. The New World then went back across the ocean and conquered the old world's way of doing things. And even Israel, right, with their sort of secular democracy is, I'm not saying it's identical to America, but of course it's like in some sense a clone of the American system. Yep. Right. But they're kind of at some weird limit of how much sense does that make in their context because of their very unique religious and historical situation. But, and watching Prince Harry, right? He's the one who's married to Meghan, right? And they have the Netflix documentary where, where she makes fun of curtsying to the Queen or something like that. And it's and he's kind of laughing along with her, although there's a lot going on behind his eyes, and it's hard to tell exactly what it is. But that anti-monarchical spirit is part of what's undermining the enthusiasm for the monarchy in England. And it's just I wonder, is it just pure Americanization that is causing that change in sensibility and values? Or is there something deeper that America's at the vanguard of that is some broader trend towards de-hierarchicalization, if that's a word? Is it just pure America spreading its values, which are unique to our past? Or is there some sort of, trend in that direction that America's been riding the coattails of?
There's in a sense, another version of the Luther question.
Right.
Can we blame America? Or, and I look at this with the Ukrainian.
Well, and Luther was part of that trend in this direction, right?
That's right.
That trend towards de-hierarchicalization, who helped start that more than Martin Luther?
Yeah, no, that's right. Priesthood of all believers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so then, some of the little drama in this little corner with Jacob and I, and, when I learned about his server, Jacob's Ladder, where he actually instills a hierarchy, which is interesting. And it's even more interesting that, he loves to get Father Eric up in the hierarchy, and oh, wow. It's just so hard to keep track of. No, you're right, Sam. And look at the Ukrainian war, and I think, part of what Russia is fighting is this wave. Because
when they say they're fighting the West, it's sort of like, well, yes.
Yes. Because Ukrainians they're looking east and they're looking west, and they're like,
I want to go that way.
We'd rather be East Germany than Kazakhstan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't blame them.
And then a lot of them were, I don't know how many, but I read that there were Ukrainians of some number that celebrated Christmas on the 25th of December, as opposed to whatever date the Eastern Orthodox calendar would naturally assign Christmas to this year.
Yep.
And if you know anything about church history, including the Council of Nicaea, fights over dates of when to celebrate important events are often signs of much deeper things.
Yes.
As arbitrary as it might seem, should we celebrate Easter on the 14th of Nisan, or should we calculate it something differently? Right? Should we use the Jewish manner of calculation or the Roman manner of calculation, which was what they were fighting about at the Council of Nicaea? Well, guess which one Constantine highly favored, right? and what that says about the parting of the ways and the differences between Christianity and Judaism, right? We're unhitching ourselves from the Jewish calendar, so we're going to calculate Easter differently. And that in the same way, should we celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, or should we celebrate it on the Eastern Orthodox calculation?
Gregorian or the Julian calendar, I think that's what it is.
Right.
And of course, my harmless Mormon guy came in and said, Jesus was born between April 1 and April 15.
there are a lot of people from my background that are very highly convinced of the September 11th dating of Jesus's birth based off of some astronomical calculations. I forget exactly how that's reckoned, but stars moving around and what the Star of Bethlehem is, et cetera, et cetera. Someone somewhere calculated September 11th, and my tradition always, put it that way. Hank, Hank, don't you know I'm live streaming? Hank, do you get calls from Hank throughout the day?
Oh, I do. I do.
Tell him to come on the live stream.
But that gets me into the mythological history vein, which I made a big video about this week too, because part of what's happening with the Cog Sci element of the This Little Corner discussion is that suddenly you have competing systems of truth. And I mean, Sam, I know I haven't done anything with it yet, but you sent me that video on evolution and
my personal testimony about changing my mind on evolution.
Well, and I thought it was a tremendous video, and there are 10 videos I want to make for everyone that gets made. And that would have been one that I would have loved to have and maybe I will at some point, because what we're learning, so now as our networks get better, as our networking gets better, as of course this limitation that we're all dealing with is getting expanded by the internet, by new voices, by new learning, all that means is that every additional new learning has to somehow also have an integration process in an already limited life, mind, and time span. And so is it any wonder that things are just sort of coming apart in terms of the traditional practices, thoughts, and agreements that kept us settled and gave us community? And it's in some ways the printing press on steroids that's happening. And that certainly gave Europe a bumpy ride.
Well, speaking of Martin Luther, yeah. And I think that and I mentioned this in the other live stream, I think one of the things that Vervaeke and Cooper were disagreeing about, and will probably disagree about when you talk with them, is exactly how to take the measure of an important historical person and talk about them in the present. Right. And Vervaeke, right, I've been seeing Vervaeke's been releasing some of those YouTube short teasers, right, on the After Socrates thing. And one of them was talking about how Plato said that he made Socrates more beautiful, right, when Plato was writing his dialogues with Socrates.
Yep.
Yeah. He makes Socrates more beautiful.
Right.
So in some sense, he's mythologizing Socrates to be a larger than life thing.
Yep.
But he's doing that because he thinks that is a more true thing to do,
right,
rather than a less true thing to do.
And he says that explicitly in the video.
Right. And it's not that Plato didn't have our same distinction between kind of mythological truth and historical truth. Plato was smart. He knew that
physical truth. I want to retrain this little corner. We're going to not use the word literal. We're going to be careful about that word historical. We're going to use physical.
All right.
Because that's the more precise word.
It is the more precise word. I respect your word policing. So that difference between physical and mythological truth, Plato knew that full well. And admits to tampering with that a little bit for a purpose of his. And I think that in a certain way, Vervaeke was mythologizing Luther, but in a somewhat negative light, which then, takes some liberties with the historical details. And then Cooper comes along, who's a Lutheran clergyman and a person who has done academic study on Luther and the early Lutheran theologians, and is like, hey, physical this, physical this, physical this. You got all of these details wrong, which, again, I said that previously. I bet that Cooper is basically right about every time that he does that.
Yep.
But then the question is kind of, so what, Cooper?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But because isn't there something slightly more compelling and interesting and relevant, I'll say, about Vervaeke's mythologized Luther and what we load onto that term now?
Yep.
And so
there we are.
So I don't know how
you still want to be the mediator, don't you, Sam, of that conversation?
I still do. Yeah, I'm still auditioning, but
yeah, I don't know that Jordan trusts you yet.
Yeah, I know. Well, he has yet to directly communicate with me once. But anyway, I'm not going to vent my frustrations with him now. Even though there's so much that we could talk about. But
well, there is, but yeah, but this again gets me into, okay, the personal relationship. And that's the key element, I think, of this little corner, that the personal relationship is critical. And part of what's going on behind the scenes is, so the guy who used to work with Peterson before Peterson went to Daily Wire now works with John. And so when you look at all of the upgrading, and when you look at After Socrates, it's beautiful. It's all the things my videos are not.
Hey, your camera quality is pretty good. I can almost read your book titles on your shelf behind you.
Yeah, that's just because that's technical. But to really do this, you need editing and editors, and I'm not there. I don't know if I ever want to go there. I'll just leave it raw. But just like 4 minutes of silence on today's video.
I don't know. Sometimes when Hank uses his computer mic and his fan is turning on and off, I have to go open up Audacity, whatever that thing is, and
Hank with the Dutch angles
and metal with yeah.
It's the Riddler angles. It's all the villains on Batman. Maybe I've just dated myself to you two youngsters. The Adam West Batman. Nope, sorry.
We're both a little young for that, Paul.
Yes, yeah.
I'm an old fart. Oh. No, and so all of these issues are sort of here, but those personal relationships, I remember, Sam, when you came in early on, Sam just said it I think Sam, no, not Sam. Hank just said to me something like, Mary Cohen never trusted Sam. That's probably true. No. She came out of, the JWs. And so she's like, nope. Father Eric can talk to Sam, but not Mary. And that's one of the things that, Hank and I talked about too, in that the strangeness of the little corners, we do have little elements of the little corner that, can't get along with each other. And you can watch them sometimes fight in my comment section. We're not about to see Jacob on Grail Country.
I was just about to give that example. Yeah, or vice versa.
Yeah. Anselman, we're not,
Anselman's learning to trust me. Anselman, I'm warming up. It is a regret of mine that I never was able to establish a positive relationship with Mary Cohen. But Anselman and I have been warming up, even though, if you remember back in my original video with you, one of the people who came out the hardest on me was Anselman.
Yeah.
But he's the most frequent commenter on my own channel, for whatever that's worth. Yes.
Good.
I have more comments from Anselman than any other person on my channel.
All right. So is this a positive thing, or are we contributing to the corruption of Anselman?
I mean,
he won't be watching this on this channel. He and Jacob don't get along.
Right. I mean, I don't think that he is doing it just to try and put in his 2 cents in the comment section, unless I lead my audience astray. I think he actually gets something out of my videos. Sure, and I think he knows that I'm bringing something to the table that he's curious about. So I don't know.
And part of what was interesting about the Hezi conversation with Rabbi, what was his last name? I forget. Jacob would very much like myself and the rabbi to have a conversation, but trust takes a little time to build. We'll see what happens. But he was going through this whole, why did God let America be? Well, that was for his people Israel, and just all of these justifications for these enormous things in the world. For why did God keep Sam from finally becoming a Trinitarian? Oh, this is just for Paul's sake. It's like. So, but part of the quality of this little corner is,
and what makes it so rich, and Father Eric, you said it so well on one of the live streams with Jacob, talking to Sam and talking to these non-Trinitarians, hey, forces me to sharpen up in some ways that being completely amidst Trinitarians all the time, these issues just don't come up. And then
it's not just even a sharpening of like polemical arguments, but I'm paying more attention to the text of the Roman Missal when I'm saying Mass. And it's like, oh, yeah, all these prayers are directed at the Father specifically. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever. Amen. It's like, oh, that's something I probably wouldn't have paid attention to so much if I had never met Sam. So
yeah. No, and I have that all over the place because, y'all have different seats in my consciousness Congress, and I can't do something without Nate or Sam or Father Eric or Jacob raising his hand and saying, yeah, but it's like, ooh. Which then leads to the question of corruption, So now I've got a non-Trinitarian and a very unusual half deconstructed Hasidic Jew in my consciousness Congress, and is this bringing me closer to Jesus or not?
Yeah. A semi-messianic lapsed Hasidic Jewish rabbi. And yet here we are on his channel.
That's right. Here we are on his StreamYard dime.
Yeah.
The funniest thing was when, I want to start this organization and people will give money and nobody will even help me pay for my StreamYard. It's like, dude, that's $25 a month. And you're talking about hiring PVK as secretary and just having some schmuck show up here at Living Stones. And yeah, this is my new secretary paid by this half Hasidic organization, Oh, but that just fits Living Stones. I mean, I swear people do not appreciate the fact that if you show up here a Sunday and you look around and you begin to pay attention, just how insane the world is, especially this little corner. So anyway, is that same way for you, Father Eric? Do you have the spiritual gift of drawing the unusual because you're here?
I don't know. My current parish situation does seem to be very middle class. It's almost like as close as we can get to going full mega church while still being Catholic.
Wow.
And you're in the suburbs of Fargo, right?
We're in the suburb that is Fargo, yes.
The suburb Fargo, yeah.
You need a lot of space between the houses to put all the snow.
Yeah.
For real. Oh, for real. Yeah, so I don't think I've got quite that same gift. I don't think I'm as patient as you are, Paul. So I've got a mean face too. So,
and also, Catholicism is less about the draw of the individual priest, right? Than Protestantism is.
Yeah, it shows how successful I am.
You are a weird kind of successful, Paul, and don't undersell yourself on that.
Weird begets weird, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love it. I really do. And you guys have brought a lot into my life, and I deeply appreciate it. So should I go to Senate again this year, Sam? You're going to do something in Chicago right before Senate?
Sure. Moises wants to plan an event. I've decided that I should not be the chief event planner of things. That's not my charisma. But helping get them going and helping them happen, I'm fine with. And so I think Moises is going to take the lead on something. You've met Moises. He's our other CRC pastor.
That's right. Hasn't maybe Jacob can recruit him to run his organization. He struck out with me and Josiah, so yeah, maybe Moises is an option.
Moises, the Puerto Rican gangster rapping CRC pastor.
Yeah,
he lives in the part of Chicago my parents told me never to go to. Right?
Yeah, well, and he's also high in high in antitheticalness. I need my own big five.
Yeah, he's low in agreeableness, high in openness, and big mouthed, and almost as tall as you are, Paul.
Yeah, and he's been on CRC Voices, and boy, he blew up that forum sometimes.
Well, he loves being the intersectional person who rails against intersectionality. That's right. That's his shtick.
So is Bethel sort of a solid part of your Chicago group, or is she still sort of on the fringe?
Well, I mean, she came for that event, but I mean, she lives over in Michigan, right? So she can't. She's never come to anything.
Just take the ferry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a train that goes all the way to Kalamazoo, I believe, but I forget where.
She's not even in Kalamazoo anymore. Yeah. She's in central Michigan. She's further north, and then you're getting up into cold white north territory.
Yeah, and she doesn't like driving in cities. Don't mean to dox her on that particular personal detail, but she's not the only one. Yeah. I bet there are a lot of
driving through Chicago. It's awful.
I bet there are a lot of residents of Fargo who would be relatively terrified to have to drive through Chicago during rush hour.
There are people out, outside of Fargo, like, I just hate going to Fargo these days. People they just don't know how to drive.
Much traffic,
Oh man, and I remember.
All right. At 2:00, I'm leaving this because I have to write my sermon. I have to make a little video for Burn. And if something's going to be in my channel tomorrow, something's going to be for Homeroom for Grizz. I'm going to have to make it. And again, I've got so many ideas. There's so many, I want to get at Exodus. Did either of you watch the Peterson conversation with the guy on psychedelics?
Yes, actually, I was exactly like you, Paul. I'm like, I don't need to listen to Jordan talk about psychedelics anymore. I'm bored of that subject, unlike the rest of the internet. But okay, I don't have anything else popping up on my Salience hierarchy on YouTube today, so I'll listen to that. And it was actually way better, and not nearly as much about psychedelics as the thumbnail. And so that was actually pretty good.
It was, and I haven't done enough with his Matt Ridley science conversation either.
Yeah.
Jordan, just when you think, for Nate, Jordan's kind of spent, but I don't find Jordan spent at all. I think he's continuing to do really good work right now. And
my sister, now that he's on Daily Wire, my sister will listen to him. She's not in the YouTube thing, but my sister's getting married this summer, and she listened to his little series on marriage, and I'm like, praise God, because I think his advice about marriage is really good. So
yeah, I don't have a Daily Wire subscription yet. I think I will. Although our Chicago meetup is moving. For the next couple meetings, I'm advertising it as a discussion group of the Exodus series again.
Oh, okay.
And so wondering if being explicitly that might draw in a couple newcomers again, because we haven't had very many newcomers for the last couple months. I mean, we have a very solid core of very dependable people, and we will have between 8 and 12 regulars every meeting, and we know each other extremely well, and it's really fun. And then we sometimes go to the bar across the street afterwards, etc. But we haven't integrated a new person into the group in a while. And it's not like we've failed to integrate someone that no one's really showed up.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if marketing our meeting as we're discussing Jordan Peterson's new Exodus series. We'll do that, and then we'll play half an hour of it right at the beginning of our meeting, and then talk about that. And so I'm trying that strategy for the next couple months, and we'll see what happens. So we're still kind of really more of a Jordan Peterson meetup than an estuary. We tried the estuary protocol once, but it's weird in a group where everybody knows everybody. Yeah. It's like go around and do an introduction and say what you want to talk about. It just feels a little bit forced when it's like Hank's just like, guys, I just want to talk about this new political thing that's caught in my, gills, and and Moises then, goes, oh, you're right. It's like, we don't need the estuary protocol when we've got Hank and Moises. So, I'm curious to see what comes about because of this.
Interesting. Well, and my estuary, Porvin Donk always feels a little, he's got estuary envy because I always have new people. And some of the new people are just meetup.com people.
And I also feel I wonder a little bit if I've exhausted or nearly exhausted the reach of meetup.com to bring me new people.
Well, you don't have my spiritual gift, because the people that come through meetup.com, living stones. They're
interesting.
Right on target.
So I don't know why we don't get interesting, meetup people. And so that's part of my experiment to try, advertising explicitly as a Jordan Peterson thing again. See if that brings anybody out of the woodwork. Because what do you call I should know. I'm like a member of your meetup group, even though of course I've never gone. What do you call yours, and what does it look like?
Sacramento Estuary.
Sacramento Estuary, yeah.
And then we've got two, because Josiah has an estuary group in Sacramento that's going well too. But
then you've got a picture of all of you, and you've got at least 3 good-looking girls, so that may be part of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't. Maybe we should, I don't know, hire ringers to come in at least for the group picture afterwards. That's a tried and true thing for churches for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, dudes are like, if there's cute girls out of church, dudes will come. And if they're there, got nothing to do, they got to listen.
That's how our Catholic college ministry works mostly, I think.
Yeah. You just select the pretty girls to do some of the prayers or whatever at the beginning of the group meeting. Don't make it too obvious that that's what you're doing, but a little bit of that can go a long way to keeping retention on some of the young men.
Absolutely. So now we've actually, with our estuary, we're getting almost 40% female participation now in our estuary. We have more and more women who are becoming regulars. And so
that's great. I mean, we've got Laura, who counts for at least multiple women, but other than that,
Let's to see what Laura thinks of that comment. No, you've got great people in your group, though. I mean,
I'm complaining a little bit that we're failing to attract new people, but our core group is pretty amazing and has some very deep and highly great contributors in our core meeting.
Yep. It's true. It's true. 8 more minutes until I got to write the sermon. I'm excited about writing the sermon, though.
What's your sermon on? Maybe a Catholic priest and a biblical Unitarian YouTuber can help you with your sermon writing.
Well, it's on the genealogy in Matthew.
Oh, that's difficult. Although notice how Jesus has a human genealogy. Isn't that curious for a god? But anyway, whatever.
You can always go with the old standby. Hey, look at all these people who were sinners in the genealogy.
Look at the women. I've preached that sermon so many times. I never repeat a sermon because I get bored with it. So this is gonna hit the themes that I've been developing through Advent, and the Joseph and Jacob are gonna have things to say, because I'm gonna hit the messianic theme again here too, because it's just, you've got Abraham, David. I mean, David is in some ways. It's interesting that this messianic theme of Davidic, a Davidic style messiahship. And of course, part of what's difficult in the Protestant canon is that you don't have the Maccabees to play with, and that Hasmonean dynasty and how that brought in the Herod. So I can bring Herod in chapter 2, because I do really think that core to Jesus' message to the Jews was this pattern of messiahship has to end, because it doesn't finally work. Because even if you have the state of Israel and are a superpower in the Middle East, and even if you have all of this, earth is, this dispensation in the world cannot hold the kingdom of God in the way that God desires it, which is why in the end of the book of Revelation, you have a new heavens and a new earth, one that can actually manifest the kingdom of God in a way that this dispensation can't.
We can't build anything on earth that can't be corrupted.
Right.
Yet Jesus still has a genealogy, right? He still fits into this creation 1.0.
Come
right?
on, Sam. You know our. Yeah,
I know. No, I'm not poking. I'm not poking you on that particular point. Only a little bit. Secondarily, but my point is that there is still a knit togetherness of creation 1.0 and creation 2.0.
Yes,
he's not just some heavenly messenger who comes down and brings heaven and who had no earthliness to him.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
Right.
And that's why I use 1.0 and 2.0, because every iteration, your software iteration, you go to version 2.0, it's a continuation.
Still a lot of that old code in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think holding these threads together, and so that's part of what I see in the Winsome Wars conflict is, how it's the old and the new. And how do the old, the wineskins, being clothed with Christ, how does creation 1.0 and creation 2.0, how do those things come together? Because obviously within my theological tradition too, we are manifesting, in some ways, we are living in the new age while we're still in the old. So new life is welling up in us as our bodies are still in the age of decay. And when you look at the ministry of Jesus, you see that conflict, because, and this is part of my pushback against the natural law tribes, in that, okay, so you've got the embodiment of the Logos here among you. How does that go? And, again, this gets into the question, well, if let's look at, say, Chris Williamson, if Jesus ate the perfect diet and lived the perfect life, well, why wouldn't Jesus have a hot wife and, work his way all the way
why
up?
Why wouldn't he be Andrew Tate, right?
Exactly.
That's who people think that if I follow the natural law, then I get to be Andrew Tate.
Right. Or Brad Pitt or Donald Trump or Elon Musk. Pick your model. And the fact is, and I learned this fairly on, when the better I got at sort of talking about how Jesus was, and I'd say things like, if you live his life, you'll get his death. And people are like, well, why the hell would I want to live his life? Look what they did to the guy. And it's no secret. It's right up there in front of every Catholic church. Well, how is this a model for me to live? And these tensions are very much in the Jordan Peterson movement, because on one hand, you see all of this, he's the ideal. Okay. It's kind of a funny ideal, though, isn't it? It's not Andrew Tate. It's not Elon Musk. It's not Brad Pitt. It's not Donald Trump. It's not Barack Obama. So those tensions are in there. And I think those tensions are in there now at this moment, where these negative world people are like, wow, the problem is that we've lost natural law. Well, yeah, fair enough. But that never really was our whole product either. So.
Oh, just a little point before you go, Paul, is there was a big movement in the 1950s in Catholicism using natural law as the way that Catholics could communicate with secular society. It's like, oh, no, this isn't a dogma, right? This isn't something we got from the Pope. This is just reason, and reason could get to this. And so there was a lot of investment, especially from Jesuit Father John Courtney Murray, to try and get Catholics to be using this language of natural law as the way we influence the public sphere.
Interesting. And that's happening in some ways in all of this. But I also think, I mean,
and
you
there's
Catholics,
a little bit of Paul on Mars Hill in that too, right?
Yeah. But you Catholics also sort of have the nature grace structure, which is helpful in this, because then at least you have a framework. And I mean, it's, again, sort of back to the other thing that I think we are now making progress on hopefully resolving many of the issues that came up in the Protestant Reformation. And at some point, the protest has to end.
False. This protest was never about them.
Radical Reformation
Radical Reformation to the end.
So anyway, and no, you're exactly right in that
not only do I get to have the kinds of conversations I've always wanted to have, but I can have them now far better than I ever could have before. It's because of all of you. And so and that's where I really want to sort of, I'm thinking actually of doing something with the patrons coming up in the new year. And I'm really hesitant about that, but part of
Patreon supporters.
Yeah.
Having a freemium Vanderklay model.
Yeah. Doing some of that. Well, because I can't. So I don't know. I was working on that stuff in my head because your
Rando's conversation model has kind of stretched past its limit of what it used to be.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to, and anyway. But where was I going with this? No, anyway, this little corner is not just about making YouTube content. This little corner is not just about promoting Catholicism or Dutch Calvinism or biblical Unitarianism or whatever on earth Jacob is trying to promote. Noahide-ism. I don't know. I really want this little corner of the internet to be about facilitating the kinds of relationships, and Sam is healing me.
No, I'm focusing my camera.
This little corner of the internet is really about facilitating the kinds of conversations and relationships, because you can't have the conversation without the relationship. That's key. So if you can build the relationship,
but it might not be as good, or it'll be different. I mean, it's not like there's never been a good conversation on the history of YouTube between two people who didn't know each other.
Right.
But
right. No.
Yeah.
But improving.
Right.
And so to the degree that we can, key is helping others. Gosh, we missed Chad. Hopefully
Chad was in the comments. We'll see how gone Chad is. I hope you're not very gone.
Oh, there he is. Because we do love you, Chad. And Jacob was way too hard on Lutheranism. And if anyone out there is going to a Lutheran church, I celebrated Christmas Eve at a wonderful conservative Lutheran church in Wisconsin. And so it's just a truism that the name of the channel should be Jacob was way too hard on blank. I mean,
way too hard on. Yeah.
that's just a function of Jacob.
It is a function of Jacob, and he uses it as a tactic to get attention. But yet here we are. So, but and I think Chad's spirit of I just want to play along, and so then creating space for more people to play along, more channels. I mean. Grail Country just went up over 1,000, which is something I think we can all celebrate. Grim Grizz hopefully will get up over 1,000. More people get to play along. At some point, even Jacob's channel will get up over 1,000. I'm sure. Yeah. How many? It is weird that he's got 772 as of my last refresh. So,
and the fact that Jacob and Father Stephen, it's about the destruction of care. Yeah. You're not wrong, Chad. But the fact that he's got Stephen DeYoung, I should probably talk to Stephen DeYoung at some point. But
there's a lot going on. I mean, speaking of corners of the internet that that struggle a little bit with each other. I mean, it's his last name and everything that means that makes your conversation with him a little difficult.
Well, that's exactly. And he and I had some exchange via email because Peugeot introduced him to me. And would you like that? I said, I'd love to have a conversation. I'd love to have a conversation, and I'd love to start out like I do all my Randall's conversations with your story. And
but it could be the case for reasons that we don't need to speculate too much about, that DeYoung isn't ready to tell that much part of his story that is very relevant to how a former CRC pastor ends up as the most popular Eastern Orthodox podcaster in the country.
And completely unknown to CRCdom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are little corners of it that know, but I mean, the CRC just like,
as much as he might not like it, his Calvinism comes out from time to time. I see it. I can smell it when it's there. He's got more. You can take the guy out of Calvinism, but you can't take right. So
yeah, that's right.
So anyway, love you, Chad. Miss your Friday morning nameless. I loved what you did, but I totally understand. I totally understand stepping back. This is, I think stepping back from time to time is a mark of sanity. So you lose no status in my mind for stepping back. And
I think I was the first person to invent stepping back from this corner of the internet. I think 3 years ago, I gave it up for Lent. So even before Exodus, however many days they're exodizing now, I think that I would like to claim the first person to have taken a break. Maybe Esther/Bethel beat me, but I don't know.
She takes regular steps back.
Yeah.
Do you know that Exodus 90 advertises on Jordan? You must know on Jordan Peterson's.
And that Catholic prayer app. What's that
prayer? You Catholics, you're so savvy.
Sneaky.
There's a reason our ancestors were afraid of you.
Why isn't the Bible Project advertising on Jordan Peterson's Exodus series, right? Where are the Protestants? And Jordan B. Cooper is right. Where are the Protestants and what's going on with that? That question is a very fair question. We are in a Protestant world, and it's being hosted by Protestantism at large, but yet where are the actual individual Protestants? I suppose I'm a Protestant, but most Protestants don't want anything to do with me, so I don't think I count.
Big P or little P Protestants.
Well, exactly. I mean, sometimes we're so Protestant we don't even consider ourselves Protestant. We're protesting the Protestants.
Yep. That's all that rebellious spirit.
Yeah.
So if we'd only listen to Hank Cruz and just go back to Rome.
Remember, there's problems everywhere.
You're being too fair. You're being too fair, Father Eric.
He has to sit next to Mark Galley in church, so that's what. Going back to Rome, swimming.
Does Mark Galley go to your church?
No, he goes to Hank's church, the Catholic Church in Wheaton, for all the former Wheaton people who've converted to Catholicism. And Mark Galley's there, Hank's there, all of that cast of characters, all those evangelical Wheaton folks who have swum the Tiber are in that church.
Hank must just have a warm surge of validation through his system every time he sees Mark Galley there. I just know it. And he's got little dolls of Ed Stetzer that he's sticking pins in.
No, not sticking pins, dousing in holy water for Pete's sake.
Yeah, because that's I was around a lot of Haitian Catholics for a long time, Father Eric. So
this is America.
Because the truth of voodoo is you can't really be really into voodoo unless you're also really into Catholicism, which I mean that's we've never touched Latin American Catholicism in this little corner. So there's a whole nother conversation.
Neither have I.
It's pretty different in Fargo. Yeah,
it's pretty different in Fargo.
You've got to have a decent amount of Hispanic immigration in Fargo.
Yeah, but it changes once it gets out of Central America.
And you've also got probably a very central core of German and Scandinavian Catholics who are...
Yeah, like this German Catholics are running the show here, which means, we've got a Spanish Mass over in Moorhead, right? But you've got Padre Nathan up there saying it, It's going to be different.
Anyway, all right, my friends. So good to see you, and
write a good message.
I'm sure Joseph and Jacob will have plenty to say about it.
Genealogies are the story of who we are. Goodbye, Paul. Good thing you left, or else I would have kept him talking. Anyway, when did your folks come over to America, Eric?
Well, we've got. We can trace some of it back to colonial times. My sister's done all of this, but mostly 19th century after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. And what country were they coming from?
We've got a lot of German, but there's also the site's name actually comes from a Serbian fellow.
Oh, interesting. Sites always sounded.
But his name just got either at Ellis Island or when he moved to Freeport, Minnesota. It just got turned into sites, and so yeah, it's mostly German Catholics from Minnesota. Yeah. So it's I don't feel responsible for slavery at all. It was like it was bad, very, very bad. Let's
even
not go back
most
to
of
it.
the Native Americans were already pretty gone from the upper Midwest by the time you guys started getting here. Yeah, the French and the Wasps had to fight those battles.
Yeah, and I just don't have very much of that. So
it was just empty farmland with someone needing to till it by the time your folks got here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that is why a lot of German folks ended up in like Wisconsin and Minnesota, because if you were coming over, say in like 1870 to 1890, and you go to Ellis Island, you ask, okay, where's the nearest free farmland that no one's using yet? And then you get on a train and you end up in, Minneapolis or wherever, and then your folks are there and the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think they were used to that kind of, long winters, all that. So.
Yeah, they got here and they're like, this looks familiar. We know what to do here. This is fine.
Yeah. So anyway, that whole thing about the 10 generations in and some of your ancestors no longer contributing any genetic code.
So
that's wild.
I meant to kind of talk with Paul about that. Because I do some research in genetics and stuff like that with my background in biostatistics, even though I'm kind of out of that field now. But I remember, so I did my Ancestry.com thing a while ago. Maybe I was still in college, and I remember getting back to Charlemagne because I got into the European royal family, and then all that stuff's online. I was like, holy smokes, I'm descended from Charlemagne. But I did the thing of like, wait a minute, if a generation's 25 years, and when was Charlemagne? 700, 800 AD, right?
Somewhere around there.
So let's say that was 1300 years ago, and you've got 25-year generation. So that's like 50-ish generations ago. And if you do 2 to the 50th, right?
It gets you a number that's way too big.
It gets you a number that is, in like the quadrillions, but there weren't quadrillions of humans back in Europe, in 700 AD. There were tens of millions. So it means that not only are you descended from Charlemagne, you're descended from Charlemagne probably in a couple million distinct ways. And everyone is, who has even the smallest drop. So,
and if everybody's special, no one is.
Right. And we sort of have in our minds that the further we go back in time, the less likely we are to be descended from someone. But it's entirely the opposite. Like the further you go back in time, it becomes almost a statistical certainty that you're descended from them because of the combinatorial explosion in the most literal sense of the word of your ancestry.
Does that apply to parts of the world that don't have a whole lot of contact with each other?
No, right. Because like you're not going to be descended from someone from Papua New Guinea 1,000 years ago, right? Because that just wasn't happening. But everyone in Central to Western Europe, you are descended from 1,000 years ago.
So we've got like these pools here.
You've got these pools, and there's probably even some strands that go out into some unexpected places, right? Like, some rogue Chinese traveler 1,000 years ago who had one kid and some,
or the Greeks pushing all the way into India under Alexander the Great.
Right. And and all it takes is for one, little seed to, be successful, and it'll get in your family tree. But even then, like 99.9% of your ancestry is going to be from the geographical area that's interacting with itself.
Yeah. It's wild.
Mm-hmm. But hey, if you have like one rogue Jewish ancestor back there, then you're almost certainly descended from the King David and everybody else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I thought was interesting about that video is how casually that doctor turned theologian or part-time theologian just brought in what we call in the Catholic world polygenism. Right, the idea that there was that humanity came from multiple sources there, and I guess so Pius XII condemned that in the 50s, but not with the strongest condemnation, but kind of like a low-level condemnation.
Right,
we're just not going down that road.
There's some hard-level racism thing, right? Like that there is literally no shared ancestry between us and say Africans. Like that was a view that some very hard-edged racists, used to hold. So I can understand why a pope is wanting to condemn that. But that isn't.
Well, it's more about the doctrine of original sin, though.
Well, yeah, and it has, and it says that we're not all descended from Adam or something like that. Yeah, but so I mean, I get that, but there are some very distinct lineages that are different in human history. Like there is the whole Neanderthal Denisovan thing, right? And there's also evidence that a fair amount of sub-Saharan people of sub-Saharan African ancestry have mixed with something, and we don't know what, that is different than, like in the same way sub-Saharan Africans don't have any Neanderthal DNA. There's something going on in sub-Saharan African DNA that we don't know where, some relative of Homo erectus, who knows, that is contributing to that. And people of Aboriginal and Papua New Guinean ancestry have a lot of Denisovan DNA, which almost no other branch of the human tree has. But even then, if you go back like a million years, even Denisovans and Homo erectus and Neanderthals and Homo sapiens all have the same source. It's just like you have to go back, like, I don't know, probably 700,000-800,000 years to get the common ancestor of basically all of the different streams that have fed into modern human populations. So I think that's longer ago than most people think Adam and Eve is. But even then, like, it's not like there was one single couple that was ever the ancestor of all of humanity. There was always a population, right? In the same sort of way that it's like the Charlemagne thing, right? All of Europe was kind of intermixing. There was always a human population, and sometimes they were distinct and then found each other again, or got distinct and one goes extinct. So, there's no evidence like that. And that was one of the things like Paul alluded to this. I've been nagging Paul a couple times to that I had a conversation on a different biblical Unitarian channel that was doing a faith and science series, and it was specifically about evolution. And the biblical Unitarian crowd is not so keen on the evolution thing, by and large. They tend to be a lot of literalists and a lot of creationists of various stripes. And
that actually makes sense, yeah. Right,
because a very literal, very back to roots, understand it in the old way kind of ethos kind of that's a correlating factor between biblical Unitarianism and creationism. So I'm like, man, I know I'm going into the lion's den on this one. I'm going on this podcast that probably has almost no evolutionary creationist listeners. And it was, I got it's not just like, I got a ton of awful comments in the comment section on that video. And even so much that the person who hosted it had to do a response video afterwards saying like, hey guys, be nicer in the comments section and stuff like that. So it's not just the Trinitarians who don't like me. I can get my own crowd just as mad at me as anyone else. But it was one. So I've been thinking about this subject more recently. I've thought about it a lot when I was like 18, 19, 20, because that was sort of when I was the creationist moving into college and studying biology and stuff like that. And that was sort of when that question kind of came to a front. But then I kind of felt like I had it mostly resolved for a while, and sort of it dropped from my attention for a long time. But now it seems to be back in a weird kind of way. So anyway.
Yeah. It's funny because you can be a creationist or an evolutionist or all sorts of things in Catholicism. It doesn't really cause you any official trouble.
Right.
Although I'd say if you were in the seminary and you were a creationist, they would the formation staff would probably say, that's fine, but keep that to yourself.
Yeah.
Because it would be, it would just be a distraction, I think.
Yeah. Like I remember reading, you'll be proud of my Catholicness.
The phenomena of
Desjardins.
No, that doesn't make me.
Well, he is Catholic, right? But he's somewhat controversial, right?
Yeah.
What's he controversial about in Catholic land?
I'm not terribly well educated, so I'm just going to throw out the Disneyland version. And the Disneyland version is he basically sold out Catholic dogma to evolution.
Yeah. So one can go too far.
Yeah.
So you guys are fine with evolution, but don't try and do evolution first and theology second.
Yeah. You got to have your principles sorted out properly.
And Paul, if you want to get me a late Christmas present of whatever camera you are recommending, I will gladly accept it. But it was, so one of those questions is that, like, you can do DNA analysis to almost semi-recover the DNA of historical people. Like, we could almost entirely reconstruct the entire DNA of Genghis Khan if we wanted to, because he did such a good job propagating, right? And so, like, his Y chromosome, that's one's easy. That's the thing that males pass on to males. But you can almost do his entire genome because he left such a big impact. And you could do some statistical analysis to basically stitch together a pretty darn good approximation of the DNA of Genghis Khan.
And then we could go full Jurassic Park on it because, hey, it's the 21st century. There's no more ethics.
Right, and we could make a petri dish Genghis Khan baby. Yeah. And the thing is,
so don't do that.
And the thing is, he'd probably be like just a perfectly normal Asian-looking dude who would live like a completely standard life, and maybe he would be slightly more prone to ambitious violence than the average person. But other than that, he was probably pretty normal. but so we can do these sorts of things. And you can ask the question, okay, so where's Noah, right? Theoretically, if all humans are descended from one male and his sons, right, which are, so every male should go back to some guy who landed a boat in a mountain in the Middle East 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, if we're going to be perfectly literal. But yet there doesn't seem to be any Noah the same way there is a Genghis Khan, right? And in fact, quite the opposite. Like that whole complex story that I was talking about humans spending most of their time seemingly in northern Africa for the last couple 100,000 years, slowly venturing out into the Middle East about 100,000 years ago, and then expanding about 50,000 years ago, encountering some trace human populations in Europe and Neanderthals, some Denisovans down in the Pacific Islands, and something or another in sub-Saharan Africa, right? We have this whole complex story, and there's no Noah anywhere in that, right? And it's not even like there's like, oh, everyone in Iraq or something like that is, descended from some lucky guy who was on a boat, and ditto Adam, ditto Eve. And so that brings up a very difficult and interesting question about how to make sense of those stories. And it's also really hard to kind of explain that evidence in a way that's compelling to lay people. Right. Like if I'm going on that Biblical Unitarian podcast, I'm like trying to explain that there's no way, unless they just like trust everything Sam says because they're big fans of my YouTube channel, that I'm going to be able to convince them, no matter how clearly I articulate that, because it'll be like, dating, science, all these things are assumptions, right? They're making assumptions. And if you question those assumptions, you get different results. Well, that's true of literally everything. But so I don't know. It's been on my mind about how to integrate that and talk about that recently. So wherever.
So why don't people like the idea of Adam living 700,000 years ago?
Why don't people like the idea that Adam was some proto-hominin who is the last shared ancestor of Neanderthals and Denisovans and humans and whatever was in sub-Saharan Africa? I don't know, because then this genealogy in Matthew, or is it Matthew or Luke that goes back to? So Matthew's genealogy only goes back to Abraham. Yeah. So Luke has well,
they have to do jumps even with a strict literalist timeline. They're not covering all the generations.
Right. But yeah, so there we go in Luke chapter 3 from verses 23 to 38. We go back to the son of Adam, the son of God, right? And so, I mean, that does bring up a question of what in the world are you supposed to make of, if we believe the scriptures are divinely inspired, what do we make of Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38?
You just had some very big jumps in there.
Some very big jumps. So where are the jumps? Is it between Adam and Seth and Enos? Okay, so there's Noah. All right, so if we're jumping around, there's still Noah. What do we make of Noah? Was it a local flood? Well, how in the world could you keep water at that elevation for 40 days?
It's the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Before that, or there was a sea in Europe that flooded, right? Like
the Black Sea was
the Black Sea. Yeah. Black Sea, yeah. It could be that. I don't know. Just playing.
Yeah. Right. And so it's because I am pretty fine with the idea of there being spiritual and allegorical forms of communication. And that, I mean, the book of Genesis, like, you know, chapters 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Okay, so we've got a talking snake, a tree of life, a tree of knowledge and good and evil. Like, do we really think that you gain a knowledge of good and evil by, you know, consuming a fruit from a particular type of tree? Well, you know, okay, all right. So it's pretty easy to feel like that is speaking at a different register than physical, as Paul would instruct us to say. Mm-hmm. But okay, but then where's the transition, right, between mythological communication and physical communication? Because in Luke's genealogy, it doesn't say like, oh, and once we get before Abraham, by the way, we're transitioning to a different idea of what genealogy is. This is just spiritual and metaphorical before Abraham, but once at Abraham, then we're physical genealogy, right? Mm-hmm. You know, it would be one thing if we only had Matthew, right, which starts at Abraham. And I'm pretty fine with Abraham onwards being pretty physically correspondent to something that actually happened. But the flood story, Tower of Babel story, you know, the first couple chapters of Genesis creation story, that doesn't seem to be of a high level or a high degree of physical correspondence to me. But yet the genealogy doesn't make that distinction. So I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah. I have an answer.
What's your answer?
Yeah, just basically the traditional doctrine of the Catholic Church, and don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. You see, I like worrying about it. No, I can't not worry about these things.
Well, some people worry themselves out of health, you know?
Yes. Yeah, some people worry themselves out of the faith or deconstructing stuff like that. But yet I also feel like that's one part of the reason why it's good to have answers to these sorts of things to prevent that sort of deconstruction. And that was why that was the main reason I went on that Biblical Unitarian podcast to talk about evolution. I'm like, I'm going to get flack. I got more flack than I expected, but I knew I was going to get some flack, and I'm used to getting flack on the internet. Although usually from opposing tribes, not my own tribe, it hurts a little bit more when it's your own tribe.
Ooh, but always.
And I'm like, man, you know, if everyone thinks I'm a heretic, that's going to get awfully lonely. It's one thing if 99% of people think I'm a heretic, but 1% don't. But 100% is an awfully big number of people to think that you're a heretic. And where was I going? I don't know. My main purpose in going on that podcast was to be like, I almost lost my faith because of this question in college. And I felt like I had to bootstrap myself to an answer with the help from a lot of people, but finding a lot of resources myself. But I want to maybe throw a life, preserver out to some people who might be in that same situation or might be in that situation in the future. Be like, hey, I was 16. I was listening to my favorite Biblical Unitarian pastor, and he interviewed that guy who believed in evolution. I thought it was bunk at the time. But now that I'm here in my high school evolution or my college evolution 201 class, I'm starting to have some serious questions, and maybe I'm going to go back and listen to that. And maybe he can help me out or point me in the direction of some help. So that was part of the reason I did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there are some theological issues that people can get really wrapped up in, which end up being secondary and not as primary. So when I was in theology, my last 4 years of seminary, we call that theology, I heard about like 19th century papal condemnations of religious liberty. And it was like, whoa. What's up with that, right? And then, you know, when you go over to the anti-Vatican II side of things, they say that was a straight up error that was introduced into the documents of the Second Vatican Council. And look, you can look at Quas Primus from Pius IX, and you can look at Dignitatis Humanae from Vatican II, and look, they contradict each other. Therefore, the church has been in error ever since the Second Vatican Council.
And that's funny. Those are the sorts of things that could cause a Catholic to start to wonder about things, is things that threaten papal infallibility, right? Whereas I'm like, whatever, don't worry about it, dude. But when when I'm talking about the genealogy in Luke, you're like, don't worry about it, dude.
Right. But listen, it's like eventually part of my resolution of that question inside myself was this idea that the relationship between church and state is a perennial problem. It's like you'll never come to a perfect solution of that.
So it's statements on that subject are provisional and locally contextually relevant.
It's not quite that. What am I trying to say here? I mean, it's kind of that, right? Like you can use promoting religious liberty as, let's just say, a tactic when you're in a liberal democracy, just to make sure that the rights of the church are respected. But I even got to the point where I thought, that old integralist model, I think it caused integralism, church and state like this. I think that ultimately caused more problems than it solved. So I came up with a form of integralism that I'm sure will please nobody but myself, where that the state has a duty to acknowledge God, acknowledge the Catholic Church, but the only thing that the church should ever accept from the state is the head of state coming to worship on key holidays. No money, no land, none of that. Just that sacramental adornment there.
So how about the German church, where you still this blew my sister lives in Germany. So this blows my mind that as a resident of the country of Germany, you have to register your religion. And there's only a few choices. There's like Catholic, evangelical, which means Lutheran. Also, for the record, everyone, Jacob and everyone was getting mad at Lutherans for having a Lutheran church. In Germany, they're not called the Lutheran church. They're called the evangelical church. So let that be known. But anyway, and then maybe you can be Orthodox and maybe you can be Muslim or whatever. And what that means is that your taxes, or a portion of your taxes, then get sent as tithes to the church that you are. So there is state enforcement at the level of tax collection, of tithe collection.
Yes. I think that's creating perverse incentives for the German Catholic hierarchy, right? Because as long as you can keep people happy enough so that they don't fill out the form of paperwork to change their religion.
To atheist, right? Or none of the above, say.
Right. Then that money keeps on flowing in.
Right. And so it creates them a very strong incentive to not say anything to alienate the people most likely to flip ship, right? Because the conservatives aren't going to jump, right? The conservatives are not. The conservative,
if they jump,
German
they're going to go to Society of St. Pius X parishes,
right? Which probably isn't on your German census registration.
Probably not.
And then, but the bleeding liberal edge of,
or even frankly, probably the center mass of people registered as Catholics in Germany, things don't look good.
Yeah,
it's not the liberal bleeding edge. I mean, maybe the liberal bleeding edge are the ones who are trying to push everything to the left.
Yeah,
but the central mass of Catholics that are just
yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Meanwhile, in the United States, the fact that priests have to beg for money, it doesn't really look like begging. It's mostly having the ushers pass around baskets. Keeps us honest, right? It's like we publish a little summary of our financial state, and it also gives the people a feedback mechanism where if a priest and a bishop are simultaneously doing something really, really horrible, you can. The money will just stop, and that will get people's attention. So,
and where do your tithes come from? Your tithes come from in America. They come from both your wealthiest and your most committed, and oftentimes probably most conservative members. And there's probably a strong Pareto distribution in the giving to a church, and that's just as true of Catholic as it is at a mega church or even a small, Protestant church, right? So. So that creates a very different incentive that you want to keep your most loyal and well-off members as happy as possible.
Right.
Yeah. Which hopefully at the time aligns well with the mission of the church, right? Which is why they're there. I'm not saying it always will, but hopefully that's a much healthier thing than your tithes come through enforced tax collection of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Which just blows my mind, because that system is centuries old, and it somehow survived the Nazis, and it somehow survived, the Weimar, like the Weimar Republic, and like Germany had a pretty tumultuous 20th century. And yet the system of tax collecting for the church is still around all the way till 2022. Just blew my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah. I should get going pretty soon, but I don't need to leave just this yet. Is Sam Adams his real name? Both
yes, he's no. The beer guy. He's the beer guy. Every time you drink a Sam Adams, he gets $5 or $1 or something.
The answer is yes and no. I mean, you know my real name. You even know my address. Your Christmas card was very lovely, by the way. So
if anybody, I have to buy a lot because I don't know how many people from the parish are going to give me one.
Yeah.
So if anybody on the Discord wants a Christmas card, just DM me your address and you can get a Christmas card. It's not hard. And you'll get on the list every year, So, yeah. I'm a big fan of the Christmas card game. Mark got a Christmas card. He liked it.
Speaking of last names, which I won't say my real last name, but before Ellis Island, my real last name was Torstensson, which means in Swedish, it is son of Thor's hammer. So, it's a pagan theophoric name. How about that? I am a descendant of Thor's hammer. I don't know how one could be descended from a hammer, but I am.
If anybody could figure it out, it'd be the Swedes.
Right. So that was something interesting that was in that video that Peugeot did with Rollins recently about the Anglo-Saxons, right? And that Alfred the Great claimed ancestry from like Odin and Adam, right? And even Alfred is red elf or something, I think. I mean, the elf in Alfred is actually Old English for elf. So a lot of those like old Anglo-Saxon kingly names you're like a relative of the elves. So that's a weird mixture of Christianity and paganism too. So I am too descended from Thor, or at least his hammer, and have a good healthy Irish Catholic stock on my other side.
Yeah, that means you're an American.
So when people see, my Christmas card from your Christmas card on my wall of Christmas cards, they're like, it's probably like Sam's second cousin or something like that, who's a Catholic priest. No surprise there.
No surprises there, although he has astonishingly German features.
Yeah. But he has about as much hair as many of Sam's relatives, so,
Okay. Oh, yeah. Good times. Good times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm starting to think about supper now. I'm sure you're feeling the same way.
Yeah, well, I've got a birthday party to go to tonight, so I should probably, it's kind of nice I actually like working this week because
nobody's bothering you.
Almost, I've gotten like 2 emails today, and like none of them were addressed to me specifically. So it's actually a pretty nice day to work and not waste a vacation day on.
Yeah, it's been very quiet this week. Nobody needs a priest. Except for somebody who needs a house blessing. I got to give them a call. Just a low-level house blessing. It's not one of those kinds of blessings.
Like an
exorcism.
Oh, you don't need to exorcise the demon or a ghost out of a house.
Just a regular old house blessing.
Gotcha. That's kind of a nice idea. I don't know why we dropped that one.
Me neither.
And every once in a while, you have a ghost in your house. And how else are you going to get rid of them? Ghostbusters, who are you going to call? Or you can call your priest.
Catholic or Orthodox could probably get the job done. Although you might.
Do you swing a censer around, or how do you exorcise a house?
Well, I've never done it, so I'm not going to claim any kind of expertise. I would end up calling our exorcists from the diocese. So, like, I've gone to people's houses and they say it's possessed, and I just go do a normal house blessing and sprinkle some holy water, and they're happy, right? So you just do that and you say the prayer in Latin, and people think it's something else. But if I was genuinely convinced there's something going on, I would call in a consultation from somebody who knows what they're talking about. I know who the exorcist is. I'm not going to dox him on YouTube, but yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, which brings up all sorts of questions about the interaction between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, I think we should call it a day.
You take care.
All right. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.